It's 5:04, and welcome into a Tuesday edition of the Carolina Journal News Hour. News Talk 1110 99.3 WBT. TikTok is seeking to dismiss a lawsuit that Governor Josh Stein filed against the social media company when Stein served as the North Carolina Attorney General. The motion to dismiss arrived in North Carolina Business Court late last week, on the same day that the U.S. Supreme Court heard oral arguments in a federal case challenging a congressional ban against the social media outlet if it refuses to divest from its Chinese-based parent company, ByteDance. According to the memorandum written by the TikTok lawyers, they said the state of North Carolina has sued defendants alleging the TikTok platform violates North Carolina's Unfair and Deceptive Trade Practices Act, the UDTPA. The state's central theory is that certain design features that the platform uses to select, organize, and present third-party user-generated speech on the platform are harmful to younger users because they allegedly make viewing this speech, quote, addictive. In other words, the state contends that the TikTok platform is unlawful because the manner in which it publishes content makes it too engaging for younger users. They continued by saying the state further alleges that the defendants have deceived users by inadequately and inaccurately describing these risks. The state's claims fail as a matter of law, and its complaint should be dismissed with prejudice. So that's what they're asking for. TikTok argued that a North Carolina court has no power to adjudicate the case, and the defendants are not at home in North Carolina, as well as that North Carolina is not a focal point of any suit-related conduct. The state's assertion, according to their lawyers, of personal jurisdiction is based primarily on the fact that the platform was available in North Carolina and that North Carolina users were allegedly harmed by viewing content on the platform. Yet a North Carolina court cannot assume jurisdiction merely because a global accessible online platform is made available to residents of a form state, which North Carolina would be, according to them. This is not the only problem that TikTok identified with the North Carolina lawsuit. They went into other various things, including Section 230 of the Communication Decency Act, which gives a rather broad level of immunity to online platforms for liability, as they claim they act as publishers instead of actual content creators. You've heard a lot of that in regards to social media over the last couple of years. We'll have some more details on this lawsuit coming up here in just a few minutes. TikTok on not only the stage here in North Carolina this morning, but nationally as they go up against this deadline against the federal government before they are potentially shut off. That deadline approaching very, very soon. It's now 5:07. You're listening to the Carolina Journal News Hour. Lawmakers from across the entire state of North Carolina are expected to be back in Raleigh in a couple of weeks to kick off the 25-26 biennium session of the North Carolina General Assembly. And for Republicans, it's been about 14 years now of success. To get some more details on that and maybe some things that the GOP should be working on over the next 2 years, David Larson from the Carolina Journal joins us on the News Hour this morning. David, the state was in a very different place prior to 2010, 2011 when Republicans took over. They've had some great wins, but looks like you're saying maybe they've got their eye off the ball, at least on a couple of things. Tell us about your piece over at Carolina Journal.
Yes, thanks for having me, Nick. So in 2011, Republicans came in on a high. They were a lot of optimism, a lot of big ideas, because they really hadn't been in power much since the Civil War, really, and so Reconstruction. So it had been largely a Democrat world in North Carolina. And I was over at the General Assembly at that time, soon after that, and Democrats giving up that grip on so many different areas of North Carolina government. It was hard to pull that away from them. So you had these moral Mondays where people were just outraged every week with all the different things the Republican General Assembly would do, changing things with schools and with taxes. And it was just kind of one big thing after another. There's a lot of low-hanging fruit at that point, just of huge reforms to make. So as you said, it's been a really good 14 years. So I definitely am not trying to criticize overall the General Assembly. I think they've really changed the landscape in North Carolina. Um, you know, the tax rate's gone down. The regulations have gone down. They've moved a lot of things in the educational world, like lifting the cap on charter schools, and also create the Opportunity Scholarship Program. Just a lot of really big wins for conservatives. And so now, there's maybe less low hanging fruit like that to huge things. So I guess the reason I was looking back is as this long session is starting, there was a little bit of grumbling amongst conservatives and especially grassroots, more very principled conservatives looking at last session because it took a long time as one issue, and some of the negotiations centered around things like casinos and medicinal marijuana that just kept going on week after week, and they couldn't get a budget together. And also there was other things that did get done, like putting a huge portion of the state budget into NC Innovation and expanding Medicaid. NC Innovation is a fund that takes research from the universities and tries to find ways to connect it to private venture capital and things like that. But I mean, they put a lot of money into that, and to their credit, I mean, there is a lot of extra money there, and there's been huge surpluses. So they're trying to find new ways to use that money. But my piece is just suggesting, that actually there are quite a few big issues still in North Carolina, some that have emerged maybe since 2011 to look at, and so it would be good if this session was kind of a return to taking some of that original enthusiasm they had in 2011 and just really knocking some of these big issues out and coming with bold, big, creative ideas to do that.
Well, and one of the things that is different, and he hasn't been the speaker since 2011, but Tim Moore, who was the speaker for quite some years, is now up in Washington, D.C. You've got a much younger individual. He joked about it during his swearing in and his first speech to the House in Destin Hall. Phil Berger still hanging out as the leader in the Senate chamber, so potentially with some of that fresh and new blood in the House, we'll get moving on some of those things. What are some of those topics that you wrote about in your piece?
Well, first and foremost, and I think to their credit, the legislature has said, both House and Senate leaders have said, top priority for them is storm relief, and that's something that the state has really struggled to get done. In past hurricanes like Matthew and out east a little bit, there's been people waiting since storms hit years ago, and they still haven't had permanent homes rebuilt. So some people call it NCORE. It's like North Carolina's, recovery and resiliency, I believe. But basically, their job, they're part of the government. The executive branch is to help rebuild and respond to major storms. There's been a lot of, money that's gone missing, I guess, and handling of these crises. And so, to his credit, I guess the new governor, Josh Stein, is actually going to, instead of going with the normal NCORE and having them deal with this latest storm out west, they're going to he created something called Grow NC, and they're going to use that instead to kind of get around some of the red tape and bureaucracy. And I think the legislature looks like they're going to be really, of one mind on that and just trying to do something fresh, take a different look at it. And because, I mean, Hurricane Helene is a once in a lifetime, maybe a few lifetimes storm,
Sure.
So it's really devastated the west of the state. And I think that's one of the maybe the biggest thing that people are calling for the legislature to handle when they come back.
We'll continue the conversation with David Larson coming up after this. You're listening to the Carolina Journal News Hour. Where it's now 5:13, News Talk 1110, 99.3 WBT. It's time to get a look at traffic on this Tuesday morning with Boomer Von Cannon.
Hey, thank you, Nick. Hot.
It's 5:20. Welcome back to the Carolina Journal News Hour. News Talk 1110 99.3 WBT. I'm Nick Craig. Good Tuesday morning to you. Of course, we have all been tracking and taking a look at the devastating pictures from the wildfires out in Los Angeles over the last week or so. However, here in North Carolina, state officials are warning of a high risk of wildfires across the state this week. Despite, obviously, the winter weather that affected our state this weekend, the North Carolina Forest Service, in a couple of press communications over the weekend, said that rapidly drying conditions, leftover debris from Hurricane Helene in the western half of the state, and wind have made circumstances that they claim are, quote, right for fires to readily ignite and easily escape. The Forest Service said drought conditions persist in a lot of places across North Carolina, particularly in the eastern half of the state, that could make it more difficult to not only control any potential wildfires, but could also make them easier to reignite. The state has a fire risk map which predicts the level of fire danger on a daily basis. Yesterday, the entire state was under a moderate or high risk. Today, 81 counties out of 100 in the state will be in the high risk. 19 others will remain at a moderate risk. And the entire coast will see the level of a very high risk over the next couple of days. The western half of the state will remain under a high risk of fires, with some of the central parts of the state, pretty much a thoroughfare between Charlotte and Raleigh, being under a moderate risk. Beyond that, days with elevated fire risks last through Sunday, according to the North Carolina Forest Service, when the ground could be dampened by some rain that is expected, a coastal or a frontal system rather, that is supposed to move through on Saturday. So something to be aware of. We've all seen the devastating pictures and some of that destruction out west. Make sure you're being super mindful if you're burning debris outdoors. We do have that elevated fire risk here across the state of North Carolina. You're listening to the Carolina Journal News Hour. It's 5:22. We are continuing our discussion this morning with David Larson over at CarolinaJournal.com about some of the priorities for the Republican-led legislature as they make their way back to Raleigh in the next couple of weeks. David, in the last segment, we were talking about, obviously, the top priority. We've heard this, whether you're a Republican or Democrat, from the governor all the way down to local elected officials, that relief for Western North Carolina. However, this is a budget year, so there's going to be a lot of other priorities that the General Assembly is focusing on as well. What are some of those other things that you cover in your piece?
Yeah, I think, as I was saying last time, this isn't to take anything away from all they've accomplished, because I do think, when they came in, North Carolina was a middling state in a lot of ways, and the conservative Republican legislatures managed to really make North Carolina a state that people are flooding into. But part of maybe a downside of that, this is an issue that wasn't as big of a deal at that point, is you have a lot of people coming in, and there's more competition for resources, especially housing resources, healthcare. So we now have among the highest healthcare costs in the nation. We also have housing that's, especially in the areas where a lot of the jobs are, like the Triangle, Triad, and Charlotte, even some of the second tier cities, Wilmington and Nashville. It's hard to find an affordable place to live for a lot of people. So this is an issue that the state will have to look at in a number of ways. But so just really the costs, and costs have gone up around the country too. So it's definitely not just a North Carolina problem. There's inflation. There's been some supply chain issues and all kinds of issues. So, but it is a problem that a lot of people in North Carolina are dealing with. It's stretching the pocketbook. It's making, people, if they want their state government and their legislators to do something, this is right up there, just make life a little more affordable.
There's no question about that. Two of the issues that you brought up previously that were hot topics back a couple of years ago, I suspect they will come up again. One of those being casinos. Sports betting has now been legal in the state, at least from your phone, for about the last 10 or 11 months. That's been widely successful in terms of generating revenue for the state. And the other, David, we see this majorly on the national trend, is some sort of at least beginning the entry to medicinal marijuana, whether that starts with medical and then transitions into recreational. I can't imagine that conversation is going to go away and could be a major sticking point as the budget rolls around sometime, probably 4, 5, 6 months from now.
Yeah, I imagine those will still be big issues. My only point in the piece, I'm not saying those aren't issues to discuss at all, but they held up the budget over those, and I don't think those are necessarily top of the mind issues for people. Is how many casinos are in North Carolina, or they have a very limited, very a couple exceptions where people can do medicinal marijuana on kind of a pilot program kind of a thing where it wasn't going to be expanded hugely. So it's just they were kind of niche issues, I'd say. I mean, to some people, those are very important, obviously. But my point there was just that, maybe some saw that in the conservative movement is getting their eye off the ball a little bit and letting the session kind of drag on over things that people weren't that concerned about, where while also doing things like NC innovation and expanding Medicaid that weren't necessarily, not only were they not conservative priorities, but it was, probably a priority not to do those kind of things. I also think public safety is another issue that we shouldn't, in different polling on what issues are important to people, we shouldn't forget about that one. Opioids, that crisis continues to go on. There's so many people who've lost a loved one to the opioid crisis. I mean, it went up from 10,000 people a year dying of drug overdoses in the United States to 100,000, between the late 1990s and now 100,000 people a year. It's a major problem, even if the numbers have plateaued or maybe even slightly come down some places. It's not come down a lot. So that, and I think that is tightly connected to other public safety issues like illegal immigration or dealing with the city centers of a lot of our major cities. People don't feel as safe going through there. There's kind of a homeless crisis as well, and also shootings in places like Greensboro, Charlotte, Durham, Raleigh. Even there's been an increase in shootings over the last 5 years or so, to where that's another reason people don't feel as safe in some of North Carolina's big cities. So I don't know exactly how those are all very complicated issues. Obviously, opioid is that crisis has been. It's tough to figure out exactly how to solve something like that, or
Sure.
youth gang violence or things like that. But definitely things that are on voters' minds as well.
Let's end on this. I think in years past, we were pretty certain what the relationship was between the General Assembly and the governor, that being Roy Cooper at the time. There's now a new top dog in the state in Josh Stein. He's not new to government, of course, serving as the Attorney General beforehand. But we really haven't seen what that interaction is going to be like between Republican leaders in the House and the Senate and him. And I guess maybe that will determine whether some of this stuff drags out or not. What do you expect from that relationship?
I don't expect it to look a whole lot different than it did with Roy Cooper. I think they're very similar. They present themselves as very pragmatic, but they're also, Roy Cooper kind of defined himself in opposition to a lot of the agenda of the General Assembly. So he had more vetoes than all. It's not a long history because they only added the veto, a couple decades ago, I guess, but he had more vetoes than all the rest of the governors of North Carolina combined. And I think they are on the line of, will they be able to override vetoes, the General Assembly? Last time they were one vote shy in the House, and then they had Tricia Cotham, who, fortunately for the Republicans, decided to switch parties, and then they had a veto-proof majority again. And now again in this election, they're one vote shy. And I remember last time the leadership said they had a few Democrats that were kind of right on the line. There's still a little bit of drama in the Democrat caucus about some people who are willing to work with Republicans, some that aren't satisfied. So who knows? There might be a chance that when the Republicans need it, that they have a few people in their back pocket that they can reach to. Sometimes the way they do that is to create a chairmanship for an important committee, and then that person feels like they're working with the majority, and they will back them on certain things. I'm not saying it's a quid pro quo like that, but that's some people sort of will end up working more closely with the majority, so I think we can expect a fairly similar breakdown into the way it was under Roy Cooper.
David, where can folks read more about this piece and all the other opinion pieces that we chat about?
We are on carolinajournal.com, and just you can get our news pieces and opinion right there, updated daily.
David Larson joins us this morning on the Carolina Journal News Hour. Where it's now 5:30, News Talk 1110, 99.3 WBT. Time for another look at traffic this morning with Boomer Von Cannon.
Hey, thanks, Nick. Huh?
It's 5:37. You're listening to the Carolina Journal News Hour. News Talk 1110, 99.3 WBT. Taking a look at some of our news this morning over at carolinajournal.com. Lynn Good, who led utility giant Duke Energy as the chief executive officer for 11 years and served as the chairman of the board of directors since 2016, is retiring. According to a press release, the board has named company veteran Harry Stridus to succeed Good as the president and CEO. That will happen come effective April 1st of this year. Duke Energy, which is headquartered in Charlotte with over 8.4 million electric customers across North Carolina, South Carolina, Florida, Indiana, Ohio, and Kentucky, is a major utility in the Southeast. Ted Craver, the lead independent director of Duke Energy, said the board is extraordinarily appreciative of Lynn's leadership during her tenure as the CEO and nearly 20 years with the company. Her many contributions delivered value to our customers, shareholders, and other stakeholders. Thanks to her leadership, Duke Energy today is an industry-leading, fully regulated utility company that is well positioned to thrive in the years ahead. Lynn's legacy is defined by the power of her strategic course, an unwavering commitment to our customers and shareholders, as well as industry-leading operations and safety, excellence in shareholder engagement, and the team that she built. Craver will become independent chair of Duke Energy's board of directors on April the 1st. Lynn Good presided over the utility as it embarked on its ambitious clean energy transition that ushered in significant shifts in energy generation sources here across not only North Carolina, but some of those other Southeast states that we talked about, catalyzed by aggressive state policies and laws. Solar produced energy consumption in North Carolina jumped exponentially during her tenure, increased by more than 10 times. In 2010, all of the energy in the state, 0.2% of that was produced by solar panels or some form of solar energy. In 2019, that was 2.7%. So 0.2 to 2.7% and continue to accelerate thereafter. By 2022, the same year that Duke Energy was forced to institute rolling blackouts during an overnight cold snap on Christmas Eve, North Carolina relied on solar for 9% of total generation. At the time, the state ranked fourth in the nation. California, Texas, and Florida were ahead in both total solar generation and in solar generating capacity, with nearly 6,500 megawatts of solar installed. In all, renewable energy sources, including hydroelectric, accounted for a total of 14% of the state's energy generation as recently as 2022. This is as the company attempts to balance growing demand with net zero goals as part of its carbon plan. In a press release, Good said, quote, "It has been the honor of a lifetime to lead this company for the last 11 years and serve with an industry-leading team. Working with communities, policymakers, and other stakeholders, I am so proud of what we've accomplished. Duke Energy is a strong and innovative position, and under Harry's leadership, we will surely seize upon the opportunity ahead to deliver for our customers, communities, investors, and others involved." Good's successor has been with the company for nearly 3 decades, holding a variety of positions. He said in a press release, "I am honored and excited to assume the leadership position of Duke Energy at this dynamic time for our company and industry as a whole. I would like to thank Lynn for her leadership and guidance over the years, the valuable position that we've obtained under her leadership, and the opportunities before us, as well as our employees' steadfast commitment to our customers and stakeholders make our future very bright." So some big-time changes over at Duke Energy. Not that it will have a direct or immediate impact on, of course, the biggest thing you interact with, your monthly power bill. However, there is a lot of shifting things happening in the energy industry, and we'll continue to track that over at carolinajournal.com. Turning our attention to some national news this morning, U.S. Senator Ted Budd co-sponsored a joint resolution this week to impose term limits on members of Congress in an effort to end career politics in Washington, D.C. The resolution was filed late last week and aims to add an amendment to the U.S. Constitution that would limit representatives serving in the House to 3 terms or 6 years, as well as 2 terms or 12 years in the U.S. Senate. Budd joined 14 other Senate Republicans in sponsoring that legislation. He said in a press release, "America's founders always intended for our legislature to be made up of everyday citizens who temporarily serve in public office and then return home to their communities. Establishing term limits through a constitutional amendment would permanently break the cycle of career politicians and bring new voices to Washington with real-world experience from all walks of American life. Term limits will force politicians to think less about their next election and more about the next generation." And while Senator Ted Budd is still serving his first term in the Senate, U.S. Senator Thom Tillis is serving his second term and will stand for re-election in 2026. In December, a couple of months ago, he confirmed his plan to run again. Though the proposed term limit amendment would block third terms for senators in the future, it would not impact Tillis or other members of Congress who have already served for several terms. Other North Carolina representatives who have served in Washington, D.C. for over 10 years include Representatives Alma Adams, Virginia Foxx, Richard Hudson, as well as Representative David Rouser. Tillis previously introduced an identical term limit resolution back in 2019 when he stressed his support for term limits dating back to his time as a member of the North Carolina General Assembly. He self-imposed a 4-term limit while campaigning for his first term in 2006. That was at the state level. He supported legislation that would have created term limits on the North Carolina Speaker of the House, as well as the leader of the Senate that passed the North Carolina House. Congress and states have the ability to offer amendment proposals to the Constitution with a 2/3 support from bodies or states, but only when 3/4 or 38 of the states' legislatures agree to ratify the proposals that would have those new amendments take effect. So term limits, always a hot conversation. We're seeing some movement on that in D.C., and who knows, maybe under the new administration coming in next week, finally looking at some level of term limits in Washington, D.C. You can read more, including Ted Budd's entire joint resolution, over on our website this morning at carolinajournal.com. It's now 5:44, News Talk 1110, 99.3 WBT. It's time to get a look at traffic with Boomer Von Cannon.
Hey, thanks, Nick. Hot.
Good morning again. It's 5:51. You're listening to the Carolina Journal News Hour on News Talk 1110 and 99.3 WBT. Taking a look at some statewide news this morning. TikTok, the very popular Chinese-owned social media outlet, is seeking to dismiss a lawsuit filed by North Carolina now Governor Josh Stein. It was filed when he was the Attorney General, which alleges that the platform violates the state's Unfair and Deceptive Trade Practice Acts, or UDTPA. The lawsuit, which was initiated during Stein's tenure as Attorney General, claims that TikTok designed features that makes its content addictive to younger users and accuses the platform of misleading the public about those risks. In a motion filed in North Carolina Business Court on Friday, TikTok's lawyers argued that the state lacks jurisdiction as the platform is globally available and does not establish significant ties in North Carolina to be sued in the state as a whole. They also cited Section 230 of the Communication Decency Act, which you've heard a lot about over the last few years. That Section 230 allegedly protects online platforms from liability from third-party content. They also made some First Amendment arguments in terms of protections for the platform and their publishing activities as well. TikTok further contends that the lawsuit fails to demonstrate violations of North Carolina law, arguing that its designed features do not constitute unfair business practices or deceptive conduct. The company dismissed the state's claims as relying on what they call, quote, non-verifiable opinions and aspirational statements. Some pretty strong words there from the attorneys over at TikTok. Going back a little bit, Stein filed this lawsuit in October of 2024, where he accused the platform of knowingly creating a product harmful to children and misleading users for profit. The illegal actions seek monetary and injunctive relief, including requiring TikTok to change its practices. Similar complaints have been filed by attorney generals in multiple states, and of course, on the national level, you've seen a lot of discussion about the TikTok platform over the last couple of months. We are very much running up against a deadline in which TikTok could be banned federally. That is at this point less than 1 week away, as justices with the U.S. Supreme Court appear to be ready to allow the U.S. government to ban the Chinese company, which is owned by its parent company is ByteDance. And breaking news overnight, Chinese officials are apparently in talks to sell the U.S. operation of TikTok potentially to somebody like Elon Musk. Boy, would that make a very interesting group of social media platforms, both Twitter, X, and TikTok, maybe under the same umbrella. A lot moving there over the next couple of days as it relates to North Carolina. We'll track the details right here on the Carolina Journal News Hour. You have unfortunately all seen the devastation and destruction out in the Los Angeles area due to wildfires that started about 1 week ago. State officials in North Carolina this morning, however, are warning of a high risk of wildfires across the state this week. This might be shocking despite the weekend snow and ice in many areas of the state. However, the North Carolina Forest Service said that rapidly drying conditions, leftover debris from Hurricane Helene, and wind have made circumstances that they claim are right for fires to readily ignite and easily escape. The Forest Service noted that there are drought conditions that do persist in many areas across North Carolina, particularly centered in the eastern half of the state, that they claim could make it more difficult to not only control any potential wildfires, but also make it easier for them to reignite. Looking at the state's fire risk map, which they produce and is available on the North Carolina Forest Service website, yesterday the entire state was at either a moderate or high risk, depending on where you were. Mountains were in the high risk, Eastern half was in the high risk. The central part of the state, pretty much Charlotte, Raleigh, up to the Virginia border, was under a moderate risk. However, today, 81 counties will be under a high risk across the state. 19 in that central swath of the state will remain under a moderate risk. And then the entire east coast of the state will see what the Forest Service is calling as a, quote, very high risk by the 15th. So that'll be coming up tomorrow. The western half of the state will remain under high risk of fires, with some in the central being under that moderate risk. The North Carolina Forest Service notes, with all of those conditions unfolding, make sure that you are super vigilant if you are burning outdoor debris, whether it's burning brush or burning other sorts of things like cardboard or things of that nature. They want you to be super vigilant, as this wildfire risk is very elevated. According to them, they say that will be the case through about Sunday due to some rainfall that is expected across vast swaths of North Carolina coming up on Saturday. So be super vigilant if you're burning outdoors. That's going to do it for a Tuesday edition of the Carolina Journal News Hour. WBT News is next, followed by Good Morning BT. That's going to do it. We're back tomorrow morning, 5 to 6, right here on News Talk 1110 and 99.3 WBT.